In 1994, 3 young residents of the convent of Santa Lucia in Italy disappeared without a trace. No screams, no struggle, no bodies. Just 3 cold beds and a walled cell. The church hushed up the case, calling him a fugitive. But in January 2025, a dying nun broke 30 years of silence. What she revealed shook the Vatican to its foundations. A confession so chilling that the recording was sealed by papal order. Situated over 1,000 meters above sea level, isolated in the forgotten folds of the Apennines, the convent of Santa Lucia resembles a relic frozen in time. Built in the early 17th century, its austere walls, covered in blackened ivy, cling to the rock like a mountain sapling. There is no direct road, no reliable telephone signal. A place isolated from the world, perfect for contemplation. And, perhaps, for oblivion. June 1994. Italy prepares to welcome summer, but up above, in the thick forest mist, the heat seems to stop at the stone gates. The convent houses about 20 sisters, most of them novices, who have come from all over Europe to escape the hustle and bustle of the century and immerse themselves in a life of silence, prayer, and renunciation. Nothing predestined them to make headlines. And yet, on the night of June 4th to 5th, 3 of them disappeared. Sister Anna, 22, Italian. Sister Maria, 19, Austrian. Sister Lucia, 21, Spanish. 3 pious and discreet young women, with no prior disciplinary record, renowned for their spiritual zeal. What do we know for sure? They were last seen at evening mass, around 9 p.m., in the small chapel in the cloister. After that, nothing. The next morning, the cell they shared was empty. Their belongings were in order. The beds were made. Rosaries lay on the pillows. No sign of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced doors. Just silence. A heavy silence, some of the sisters said, as if something had been ripped from the very stone of the building. Mother Superior didn't sound the alarm immediately. Officially, she expected it to be a temporary bout of doubt. A spiritual escape. A vocational crisis. It took 48 hours for a police officer from the city of Norcia to inspect the site. He took a quick look, made some notes, and exchanged a few words with the nuns. According to him, nothing warranted a wider mobilization. The final report is laconic. Probable voluntary absence. The word disappearance appears only at the bottom of the page, under the heading of secondary mentions. No search dog, no search of the woods, no appeal for witnesses. Under other circumstances, perhaps, the case would have merited more in-depth attention. But this is 1994, in a remote corner of Italy, and the victims are 3 young people with no voice, no close family in the region, no media attention. So we recorded it. Quickly. And discreetly. Weeks pass. No calls. No messages. No proof of life. Not a single piece of clothing found, no clues. It's as if the 3 young women had vanished into thin air. Some priests suggest an organized escape. Others speak of a suffocating vocation. The church remains silent. It prefers to avoid questions. And, above all, to avoid answers. However, one detail continues to intrigue the few researchers who, years later, dare to reopen the case. The convent's internal records, kept by hand every night by the Mother Superior, make no mention of any anomaly that night. Yet the line corresponding to June 5, 1994, is simply missing. Torn from the notebook, carefully and meticulously, as if that day had never existed. This detail alone could have been dismissed as a mere administrative error. But in a place where every minute of prayer is recorded with military rigor, a full-day absence becomes a cry in the shadows. A void waiting to be filled. Even stranger, no member of the clergy assigned to Santa Lucia ever agreed to comment on the events. Interviewed many years later, some elders spoke of a forced silence. Others, more rarely, let out furtive glances and ambiguous murmurs. They shouldn't be there. Or even, they were sent to balance something. But in 1994, no one wanted to hear that kind of talk. Italy was preoccupied with other scandals, other cases, more visible, more marketable. And frankly, who cared about 3 nuns who disappeared from an ancient mountaintop monastery? This is how the story could have died. In a sealed drawer. A footnote in the City Hall archives. A cloistered rumor that time slowly erases. ###, but sometimes, what we bury too quickly doesn't really die. It sinks, ferments, and waits. Because 30 years later, a voice will break the silence. A nun. A survivor. And her confession will not be absent nor forgotten. It's still early that morning. Too early for the bells to ring, too early for the chants to intensify. Just another day, but not just any day. A sister, perhaps Sister Benedetta, perhaps someone else, memories remain hazy, goes upstairs to wake the young novices. She stops abruptly. A strange chill. Not the usual cold of stone corridors. No, something deeper. A chill in the air. As if the temperature had dropped several degrees, right there near that door. The one leading to Anna, Maria, and Lucia's room. The doorknob won't turn. The lock resists, but from the inside. First detail. Inexplicable, ignored, yet fundamental. It's material, observable, undeniable. The door, which should be open at dawn, isn't. No key works. The hinges will have to be forced. But even before opening it, something insinuates itself. A smell. It's not the incense. Not the damp walls. Not the cold wax of the candles. It's an animal stench. A smell of rotting flesh. Of burning hair. Of sour milk and old mold. It sticks in the throat, penetrates the nostrils, lingers on the clothes. A smell that shouldn't be there. A smell too strong for an empty room. When the door finally opens, the emptiness seems to suck the air from the hallway. The room is perfectly tidy. The sheets are folded, the wardrobes closed, the cross stuck to the wall. But something is wrong. The walls are dripping. Literally. A thin, damp film slides between the stones. And on the ceiling, black streaks, like soot, trace an incomplete circle. No one speaks. Faces are closed. Eyes are avoided. It's in the hours that follow that other things resurface. Hazy memories. Impressions jotted down silently but never spoken aloud. The night before, several sisters downstairs claimed to have been awakened by a strange noise. A chant, they said. But not a liturgical chant. Something harsher. More ancient. A spiraling murmur, like a litany, but in reverse. Barely audible. As if someone were praying through a layer of earth. A single voice. Then several. Dissonant. Like mouths singing without tongues. They say one of the sisters, Sister Clara, scribbled in a notebook hidden under her mattress. They sing through the walls. But their voices are not the same anymore. This notebook was taken from him within a week. It never reappeared. But the singing continued. Not every night. Not in every room. But sometimes between 2 and 3 a.m., the air seemed to grow tense. As if the convent itself were holding its breath. And in those moments, one could hear something. A low rumble. A repeated word. A word no one could translate. Not into Latin. Not into Italian. Not into any known human language. When the younger ones start talking about it among themselves, Mother Superior intervenes. Firmly. Silence is our strength. Doubt is the work of the devil. Any mention of singing is forbidden. Any discussion of the sealed chamber is forbidden. 2 novices who insist are sent into retreat, a 7-day period of complete isolation. They return pale, with lips cracked from fever and empty eyes. A ban hangs in the air, more effective than any punishment. Don't mention the missing women. Don't ask questions. And above all, don't listen when everything starts again. Because it's starting over. Always in the same place. Always the same smell. Always the same sound. A low, almost inaudible vibration that permeates the floor and penetrates the bones. Some sisters say they felt their crucifixes heat up. Others swear they saw, just once, a shadow at the end of the corridor. A thin figure. Motionless. Staring, faceless. But in the official archives, none of these elements exist. Not a line about the locked door. Not a word about the smell. Nothing about the chants. What the church cannot explain, it erases. What the church cannot control, it buries. And yet, the wall holds. The wall knows. Sister Clara was anything but unstable. At just 18, she was one of the most frequent novices, and also the quietest. She wrote down every reading, every prayer, in a little black notebook that she kept dearly. She hadn't yet taken her vows, but Mother Superior said she was already a soul cut out for sacrifice. This was precisely what would make her downfall all the more troubling. The disappearance of the three sisters affected her more than others. It was evident in her gestures, in the way she prayed longer, in the way she stared at the tabernacle until her eyelids fluttered. But she didn't speak. Not at first. Then one night, she woke up screaming. A brutal, animalistic scream, as if tearing her insides apart. It was the other novices who found her huddled at the foot of the bed, her hands pressed to her ears, repeating over and over, they were scratching. They were still scratching. That morning she asked to leave the convent. Not to be transferred. To leave. Forever. It was unprecedented. A novice renouncing her training is rare, but possible. What's less important is that she refuses any interview with the Mother Superior, any ritual farewell. She left Santa Lucia like someone escaping from prison. She walked alone to the village of Castelluccio. As soon as she arrived, she went to the parish church and asked to see a priest. Father Lorenzo would later say that the girl was white as a shroud, trembling. At first, he thought she had been attacked. But what she said was anything but true. She whispered, "They're still there. In the walls. I see them at night. They look at me. Eyeless. They whisper, 'Free them.'" And later, in a whisper, "But I don't think it's them anymore." The priest heard her. Then he called an ambulance. Clara was admitted to the Spoleto Psychiatric Hospital. The diagnosis came within a few days. Acute psychotic disorder, auditory hallucinations, derealization, dissociative symptoms. She will never be able to set foot in the convent again. But where the story becomes opaque is in the details of the medical records. One of the psychiatrists, now retired, later stated in an unsigned letter that the young woman displayed a disturbing lucidity. She spoke of very concrete and recurring elements, a rhythmic moaning coming from the wall of her cell, always at the same time, precise visions of the three missing sisters with whom she had never had close contact. She described their faces precisely. Lucia's broken bracelet, the mole under Anna's left eye, Maria's bitten nails. Details she couldn't have known. The psychiatrist also mentions a worrying detail. Clara scratched the walls of her room herself, not with his hands. With his teeth. His gums were bleeding. And that's not all. In Santa Lucia, the other novices began to speak. Softly between silences. Still whispering, still with their eyes lowered. They said that, at night, the creaking of the wood had changed. That the walls, previously silent, seemed to sigh. Sometimes, they heard what sounded like footsteps. But on the stone, below, the older sisters reprimanded them. If a novice spoke too much, she was placed in isolation. If another wrote down her feelings, her notebook disappeared. As the days passed, the silence deepened. It became heavier than the prayers themselves. An organized silence. Prescribed. But this silence didn't erase anything. It only allowed the fear to spread. And above all, this fear wasn't always linked to what the sisters heard. It also came from what Facen say diffuse malaise. A constant pressure. As if something were squeezing them night after night. As if their prayers were no longer rising. As if they were crashing against the vaults, sent back to their throats. A sister recounted many years later that she had begun to have a recurring dream. She was walking down an endless hallway, and behind each door, she heard crying. But when she opened it, there was no one there. Only the smell of meat. And a phrase engraved on the wall, "You shouldn't have come in here." This kind of dream isn't a theological argument. Nor is it scientific proof. And yet, it occurred to several residents, with disturbing variations. Everyone saw doors. Everyone heard voices. No one managed to escape. In reality, nothing concrete. No deaths. No evidence. Just a growing tension. A logic that no longer held. A convent that had become incoherent. And eyes that systematically avoided the back wall of the dormitory, the one that no one touched, that no one really cleaned. So when Clara was admitted, it was almost a relief, as if arresting the one who had spoken out would silence the others. But fear did not remain silent. It simply changed its face. July 8, 1994. 3 weeks after the disappearance. It's 5:17 a.m. when the convent's silence is broken. A novice screams. Not a scream of surprise. A pure scream. Visceral. The kind that comes when you see what your eyes refuse. She's come to fetch Mother Superior for morning service. She opens the cell door and falls to her knees. Mother Superior, Sister Eugenia, is hanging. Literally. With a prayer rope around her neck, tied to the central beam support. Her body sways gently above the ground. But it's not the hanging that gives the sisters chills. It's what she did before she died. At the back of her throat, a complete rosary. The bloody beads overflow from her mouth. She tried to swallow, bead after bead, until she choked. The scene is one of silent violence. No sign of struggle. No defensive wound. And above all, no explanation. The official autopsy concluded that it was a mystical suicide. Overwork, guilt, psychological collapse. The terms are calm, cool, and comforting. They reassure those who need it, not those who live inside the convent, because there was something else in the room. On the back wall, the one overlooking the deactivated north wing, are fingernail marks, drawn vertically, and between these marks, a word, engraved, ripped from the stone, as if scratched with superhuman strength. 3 words, "They are there." And below, smaller, almost erased, "Below us." The cell is immediately sealed by ecclesiastical authorities. A Vatican emissary, Father Girolamo, is sent that same night. An exorcist, specializing in sensitive cases. He arrives silently. He doesn't speak to anyone. He inspects the place alone. And after 3 hours in the cell, he gives a single order. Seal a crypt. Because what no one had understood until then was that the Mother Superior's cell was located right above the abandoned crypt. The one whose access had been blocked since 1962. The one that doesn't appear on any modern map. The one the older women secretly call the belly. The next day, the crypt was walled with quicklime. 3 masons from Nursia worked under the direct supervision of Father Girolamo. None of them were authorized to speak to the press. But one of them, years later, would make a partial confession. There was something underneath. A breathing. As if the stone was breathing. That same day, several sisters were transferred. Those who witnessed the scene, but also others, chosen without explanation. They were isolated and dispersed to other convents. Some would never return to their vows. One of them, Sister Rosa, would commit suicide 5 months later. With barbed wire, in an abbey in the south. The convent officially enters a period of silence. A rare measure imposed by the Vatican to ease spiritual tensions. No visits, no letters, no public masses. The cloister closes in on itself. And this silence, unlike the previous ones, is ordered from above. But in this silence, the remaining sisters sense something else. A heavy absence. Not that of the Mother Superior. Not that of the missing. An inverted presence. As if, by sealing the crypt, they had freed what was around it. Some speak of sudden illnesses. Migraines that strike simultaneously, always between 3:12 and 3:18 a.m. Others speak of the smell of flesh rising from the air vents. A novice vomits blood, without medical cause. Another mutilates her tongue, convinced that her prayers might be heard. But no formal proof. Just signs. Fragments. Cracks in reality. Father Girolamo remained there for 3 days. Then he disappeared. Without a word. Without a report. The Vatican would later say he had been assigned to other missions. But no one knew what those were. The Mother Superior's cell remains walled. But sometimes the sisters swear something still scratches behind the sealed door. When reopening a 30-year-old case, one doesn't expect to find any concrete evidence. Especially in a case the Vatican itself tried to cover up with silence. And yet, some things have survived. Images. Sounds. Words. Scattered fragments that no one really wanted to connect. until an independent journalist, Marco Bellini, decided in 2011 to unravel the thread. Bellini wasn't a believer. He wasn't even interested in religious matters. He was investigating abandoned convents for a photography project on the memory of sacred places. But it was when he came across the story of St. Lucia that he strayed from his original theme. He found a forbidden photograph in the diocesan archives of Perugia, filmed with an old film camera, poorly framed, a little out of focus. However, what it showed chilled the blood of all who saw it. We can see the crypt before it was permanently walled off. In the center, 3 human forms. Very thin, almost translucent. They're not clear, but they're there, and their posture is abnormal. Their heads are turned toward the wall, as if they were praying or worshiping. Bellini entrusted the photograph to a digital imaging specialist. No editing, no tricks. The negative was intact. Spectral analysis revealed a thermal phenomenon around the shapes, as if the stone had retained an impression. The laboratory concluded, unexplained anomaly. But that's not the only trace. On a second visit to the site, unofficially authorized by a former parish employee, Bellini discovered an abandoned cassette tape in an old cell. Marked, Night 17.02.1995. The recording begins with the sound of footsteps. Then, for several minutes, nothing. Then a sound. Very soft. A chant. Not in Latin. Not in Italian. A female voice, hoarse, slow. Like a drawn-out whisper, saturated with echoes. Bellini played the tape for 2 linguists. Neither could identify the language. The only recognizable word appeared 3 times. Triple. A variation of the Latin word for triple. But spoken in a distorted voice. As if she weren't human. Or alone. A retired exorcist, discreetly contacted, listens to the recording. His reaction is immediate. He removes his headphones, turns pale, and whispers, "He does not invoke God. He imitates him." He refuses to say more. And then there's this notebook, found at a Florence flea market in 2017, bound in black leather, with no author's name. Inside, shaky handwriting, written between 1994 and 1996. On page 33, a passage stands out. They are there. The stone guards them. The walls exude their inverted faith. They do not sleep. They wait. The wall is thin. The air carries them. The notebook is attributed to Sister Clara, the former novice hospitalized after her crisis. It should have been destroyed during her hospitalization. But someone kept it. The text is fragmented but coherent. And what's disturbing is its precision. It describes the exact positioning of the cells, the conduits, and even an underground gallery that the official plans don't mention. A gallery that would connect the crypt to an old, disused chapel, now in ruins. A group of Italian urban explorers attempted to verify the existence of this passage in 2019. They illegally entered the abandoned archaeological site of Santa Lucia. A GoPro video was released a few weeks later, before being mysteriously deleted. But a clip has been preserved on a private forum. It shows a narrow, musty hallway, lit by a headlight. At one point, a sound. 3 loud knocks. Then, in the shadows, a thin, motionless shape moves in the background, silently. The face is not visible. But what is striking is the silence after its passage. As if sound itself had frozen. Finally, Father Alfredo's testimony, collected in 2020, completes this series of disturbing evidence. At 86, he claims to have received a confession from a nun from Santa Lucia in 1995. Due to secrecy, he cannot reveal what she said. But he does let slip a disturbing sentence. She didn't tell me about a crime. She told me about a pact. And about an awakening. A pact. An awakening. This is where the elements cease to be anecdotal. For, taken in isolation, each could be attributed to imagination, coincidence, or paranoia. But together? Together they trace something different. An invisible line. A coded message in the walls, in the stones, in the muffled screams. Something was seen, heard, felt, documented. And still, nothing was done. Or maybe everything was done so that this would not be known. Before the convent of Santa Lucia became this silent place of cold stone, it had another name, that of a forgotten medieval hermitage, dark sacred light. The dark light, a paradox inscribed in stone, engraved on the lintel of a now-walled door. It was the 13th century. The place was not yet a convent, but an isolation cell for visionary penitents. Mostly women, whom the church suspected of receiving unconventional revelations. They were neither condemned nor free. They were placed there, halfway between the world and silence. They were called the megaphones. Few written records mention this sanctuary, but in the archives of the nearby Abbey of Monteluco, anonymous chronicle mentions, in 1247, voices rose from the stone. 3 virgins spoke of a cold fire, of a broken angel, and of a name not to be spoken. Silence was decreed, and the earth was sealed. A seal, a sealed land. The underground gallery mentioned in Sister Clara's notebook may well be one of these forgotten areas, not by accident, but by necessity. Over the decades, places changed functions. The Black Death hit Italy in the 14th century, and dark sacred light becomes a refuge for the dying. The walls are imbued with their prayers, their screams, their visions. It is said that monks in a trance saw silhouettes prowling between the rooms. But above all, one name recurs in several fragments of text, Lucine. Lucian was not a saint. She was never canonized. According to local tradition, she was a young woman secluded in the crypt, her eyes burned by divine light. Some say she talked in her sleep. Others say she never slept. A passage from the Book of the Causes of Darkness, a manuscript from 1421, mentions. The child speaks of an inverted trinity, of a song heard when the stone breathes. She refuses bread. She drinks only water from the walls. And she laughs when we pray. Her name was then banned from religious services. But Lucien's echo survived, passed on in secret by some sisters. By 1733, the sanctuary had been converted into a convent. The name changed, St. Lucy. Irony? Or an attempt at purification? Some believe the name change was not a tribute to the holy martyr, but a desperate attempt to contain a presence, to rename evil to erase it. But a name is not enough to erase what is written in stone. The convent's early years were marked by apparent calm, but several letters found in private Vatican collections evoke unease. In 1789, Sister Magdalena wrote, "The novices wake up screaming, the choir wall overflows, and the singing returns, always at the solstice." The solstice, a moment of change, when day and night vie for the throne. This detail will return much later, in contemporary research. But since the 18th century, it seems the place has been punctuated by an invisible cycle. A breath, a reminder. The archives became increasingly scattered in the 19th century. The convent closed in on itself. Few vocations, few visitors. It became a closed world. And it is here that a name returns in the diary of a missionary bishop in 1866. Sister Benedetta He describes it as possessed by the echo of the ancients. It is said that she carved a single phrase into the wood of her cell, repeated 100 times. The light returns, and it has 3 faces. 3 faces. 3 young people. 3 disappearances. The parallel is disturbing, as if, in this repetition, there were not an accident, but a reactivation. A chilling detail emerges from the convent's restoration notes, written in 1899. During drainage work, workers discovered a partially destroyed circular room beneath the crypt. Inside, there's a fresco, partially faded by the humidity. It depicts a veiled woman with open hands, surrounded by 3 eyeless children. But the most disturbing thing isn't the scene itself. It's the inscription, in broken Latin, that frames it. There is no forgetting, only sleep. There is no forgetting, only sleep. This long-buried past seems to have been more than just a historical backdrop. It's the root, the invisible soil from which something sprouted. Something slow, intelligent, silent. What if the convent had never been sanctified? What if it had been built, not to protect, but to contain? Her voice trembled, not from age, but as if the words themselves refused to come. Her name was Sister Rosa, 83 years old, a former student of the Convent of Santa Lucia, and the last to share a meal with Sisters Anna, Maria, and Lucia, the day before her disappearance. The interview took place in a religious asylum in Perugia in 2017. A freelance journalist, passionate about cold cases, found her almost by chance. She had never spoken before. To anyone. Not even her confessors. There were several visits. Several silences. Until she whispered, "They weren't alone in the room." He thought he had heard wrong. Then she repeated it, louder, but with a distant look in her eyes. That night in the cafeteria, I looked at them. And I saw an empty space. Like a shadow, but slower. It lingered behind them. As if something was listening. Sister Rosa wasn't senile. She still recited psalms in Latin. Her gaze was clear. But as soon as someone mentioned that night, something inside her froze. She said, it wasn't a disappearance. It was an offering. When asked what she meant, she didn't answer right away. She pulled an old, yellowed postcard from the drawer. It showed a picture of the Virgin Mary, from behind, facing a mountain. Behind it, in blue marker, were some words scrawled in hesitant handwriting. The light no longer comes from above. It emerges from the ground. She explained that a month before their disappearance, the three young sisters had changed. They spoke less. They prayed at odd times. And, above all, they had isolated themselves from others. They said that traditional prayers were no longer enough. That we needed to listen. To remain silent. And that there was something to embrace. Sister Rosa remembered a specific detail. One night she got up to get a drink of water and found Sister Anna in the hallway. She was standing alone, facing the wall, her eyes closed. And she was singing. But it wasn't a religious song. It was like a whisper in reverse. A ragged breath. Not human. But she seemed at peace. She didn't dare say anything. Out of fear. Out of obedience. Out of instinct. And then, on the morning of her disappearance, the smell. Like burnt iron. Flesh, but cold. And that silence. A dense silence. It stuck to the skin. When asked why she had never spoken, she began to cry. And her answer was the most chilling. Because they told me that if I told, I wouldn't be alone anymore either. This one was never identified. But Sister Rosa spoke as if the threat didn't come from a human being. As if the danger didn't come from the outside world, but from those who listen when certain words are spoken. She concludes the interview with a strange prayer, which the journalist was never able to translate. He recorded it, and linguists consulted later identified a very ancient dialect, a mixture of liturgical Latin, Phrygian, and ancient Greek. A lost litany. Proximate translation. May the stone still sleep. May the name be forgotten. May the light not hear. Rosa said she learned this prayer as a child, without ever knowing where it came from. And she claimed her three sisters also recited it. But eventually, they stopped. And it was then, she said, that the wall began to listen. There were no further interviews. A week later, Sister Rosa was found dead in her sleep. The autopsy indicated cardiac arrest. Classic for his age. But what the report doesn't mention is that his bed was covered in a fine, almost metallic, black dust. And that on the wall above his head, traces of moisture formed 3 interlocking circles. Since then, a recording of his prayer has been circulating on occult researcher forums. Some claim that listening to it at night induces dreams. Others say it gives a strange feeling, as if someone is watching us from inside the earth. She's gone. Like the other 3. And yet she came back. Not immediately. Not the next day. But 22 years later, almost to the day. It was 2016. A woman in her 40s was found wandering in a small, abandoned train station near Spoleto, about 20 kilometers from the Convent of Santa Lucia. She didn't speak. She wore no documents. Just a gray, worn, almost monastic robe. And around her neck, a medal of the Virgin Mary, darkened by time. Her DNA confirmed the impossible. It was Sister Maria Albrizzi, one of the missing persons of 1994. Officially, it was concluded that it was a mystical escape. Local newspapers briefly mentioned a woman found after a long pilgrimage. No national media outlet reported the incident. No connection was made publicly with the convent case. But the station's CCTV footage, which has never been shown, tells a completely different story. She was not alone. We see her enter at 3:17 in the morning. Her steps are slow, precise, almost mechanical. Her arms are at her sides. Her face is expressionless. She crosses the empty waiting room, stops in front of an old bench, and sits down. For exactly 13 minutes, she doesn't move. Then, for no apparent reason, she stands up, turns, and looks directly at the camera. As if she knows. As if something else is watching through her. The shocked staff at the small station called the authorities. She was transferred to the psychiatric hospital in Terni. There, they tried to get her to talk. Doctors noted selective mutism, a profound dissociative state, and strange physiological disturbances, low body temperature, unstable blood pressure, skin markings in the form of concentric circles on the back of her neck. But it was on the third day that everything changed. A nurse reports that around 4 a.m., Sister Maria began singing in her room. It wasn't a religious chant. It was a high-pitched, interminable murmur with guttural sounds in the background, as if two voices were singing at the same time, but in opposite directions. And then she spoke. Not for doctors, not for priests, but for a dimmed light bulb, for a stain on the wall, for what no one else saw. His words were disjointed, but several phrases came back over and over. We opened the door. He was already here before us. He speaks through forgotten prayers. A psychiatrist tried to make her listen to Gregorian chants to calm her down. Her reaction? A scream. Violent. Animalistic. She retreated to a corner of the room, huddled, her eyes rolling back, screaming. It's not him. It's not him. You don't understand. Then silence. No more words. Until she wrote. One night she asked for paper. And for 3 hours, non-stop, she wrote a text of over 60 pages, in a language no one immediately recognized. Initial linguistic analyses revealed a mixture of corrupted Latin, Aramaic, and a lost dialect of ancient Umbria. Some words did not appear in any known dictionary, but the structure of the text resembled a liturgy. A roughly translated excerpt reads, "When the light hides, the stone opens. When the prayer breaks, the song descends. He who hears without ears will be the bearer." Since that day, Sister Maria has been confined to an isolated ward of a psychiatric hospital under an assumed name. No one is allowed to visit her without special authorization from the diocese. Her files have been sealed, but a hospital employee, anonymously, reportedly said, "She never sleeps. She just stares at the wall, like she's waiting for something to come back." And sometimes, in the middle of the night, the other patients still hear him whispering. One phrase, repeated over and over, like an incantation. There are 3 left, only one came back, but everyone is still listening.